Sam, my dude, SaiyanSalamander here, and today I'm going to be talking about some Fey refines again. But unlike last time where I redid old refines that I thought needed upgrading, I'm going to be talking about a weapon archetype that really hasn't had many refines yet. Staff refines. So this was actually the first Heroes video I planned to make, other than the Fey channel reacts and my summoning videos. But then I kinda got distracted making other videos, and then Veronica's refine got announced, so I figured I'd wait till after her refine release to upload this video. Other than Brave Veronica though, there isn't a single staff unit with a refine currently. And the only other staff units with preferred weapons are Brave Camilla, Loki, and Bridal Fjorm. So because of this, I wanted to talk about the top 10 staff units in Heroes at the moment that I'd love to see get a new refine, as well as theorycraft what kind of weapons and abilities they'd have along with it. Now, I may have gone a tad overboard with all of the weapons in this list and gave them a bit too many skills, but I just want all these units to be good, okay? Now, before I start this list, I should mention that there'll only be Gen 1 and Gen 2 characters on this wish list, since those are the only characters that I've had refined so far. Sorry, new healers. Since that's all out of the way, let's get on to the list. Starting off with number 10, we have Lachesis from Genealogy of the Holy War. Lachesis is the descendant of Hazel, the original wielder of Mistletoe, as well as one of the 12 Crusaders of Jugdrill. She is also the younger sister of Eldergun, which according to Heroes is the only thing she's actually known for. Lachesis is a 148 BST infantry healer with no real standout stat to speak about, and doesn't really have any super boons to help increase any of these stats either. In FE4, Lachesis is the princess class, which I believe allows her to use swords and staves, with her signature weapon being the Earth Sword, a gift from her brother which she eventually passed down to her daughter, Nana. The Earth Sword is basically a blade version of Lachesis' original staff weapon, Absorb, as it saps health from the enemy and restores the user depending on how much damage it was dealt. It also cancelled the effect of Great Shield, which after doing some research seems to refer to the skill Pavice. Typically the way you'll see all these preferred weapons and refines go is that I give the unit either Dazzling Staff or Wrathful Staff, a +3 to 1 stat, and then 2 additional skills, one in the base weapon and one after a weapon's been refined. However, Lachesis is a very low tier unit, and being a descendant of one of the 12 Crusaders and all, I figured I should give her a bit more of a buff. I tried to give her a staff version of her Earth Sword, which is why I named it the Earth Stave, kinda like how Shida's Wing Spear became the Wing Sword in Heroes. To start with, I kept the properties of her original weapon Absorb Plus, since Earth Sword had the same effect. Next up, I gave her Wrathful Staff free, since I figured it worked better than Dazzling Staff in combination with the other abilities that I gave her on her preferred weapon. Plus, you can always add Dazzling Staff to her B slot later on if you want. To end off her preferred weapon, I gave her the skill Fury Free, which is a skill healers can't typically learn. However, we've had plenty of weapons before that give access to skills that a unit can't typically learn, so I think there's no harm in it. This brings her BST up to a solid 160 total, which is actually around on par with other infantry healers that have been released in more recent times. She still doesn't have a really strong stat in particular here, but it makes her attack and resistance stats pretty solid. Other than getting her BST up, the other reason I gave Lachesis Fury free was because I wanted to reference Eldergun in some way, since she's known as Lionheart's sister and he's the one who gave her the sword in the first place. Because of this, my options were Accelerate Special Cooldown -1 and Fury Free, and I figured Fury Free would help more here. Now this is just all in her preferred weapon. With a refine afterwards, I wanted to add her ability to disable Great Shield, meaning that when Lachesis attacks, she'll disable skills like Aegis, Close Call Free, and Repel, meaning that skills that reduce damage won't activate when she attacks. To be honest, the Fury Free might be going a tad overboard with the weapon, but I think it makes her a really good unit, and even with all this, it's still nowhere near as broken as young Shida's Feather Sword at least. The next unit on the list is Mist from Fire Emblem Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. Like Lachesis, Mist is a 148 BST infantry healer, and even though she's 5-star locked, her stat spread's probably worse than her. Mist's only really good stat is resistance, with everything else being poor or below average. For the weapon I gave Mist, I basically took inspiration from the rest of her family, with her staff being named Elena's staff, which is named after her and Ike's mom. As for the effects, I based it on a weapon used by her father and her brother's weapon, Irvon. Her initial weapon's effect is the same as Ike's Irvon, but with a couple changes. Instead of -1 special cooldown, Mist gets +3 to her defense, as well as Wrathful Staff, since with what I gave Mist, I don't think she actually needs Dazzling Staff, since she'll be more of an enemy phase unit. The +3 defense is because even though Mist doesn't have good defense initially, with this boost and other factors like Dragon Flowers and what I'm giving her for a refine, it'll make her a lot more bulky than you'd first think. The final effect is where I said I'd be taking things from Irvon. Mist can make the foe make a follow-up attack before she can counter-attack. and also reduces damage from the foe's first attack by 40% and reduces damage from the second attack onwards by 80%. I think this refine works really well because Mist and Brave Ike have the exact same speed stat, and basically have their defense and resistance stats swapped with each other, with Ike having one more defense and Mist has resistance. As for the HP and attack, Ike has a lot more of both of those stats compared to Mist, but even with these lowered stats, I think she can make really good use of this weapon. This makes her a really good bulky enemy phase unit, where she can eat up hits and deal damage back, and then heal any allies that also took damage on the player phase. I think I could see her running close foil really well too, since it'll patch up her poor attack and defense stats, and make her even more of an enemy phase threat. So I've got to be honest, I've never actually played Lachesis or Mist's original games before, but this next character I've actually played this game before, even though I still yet to complete the game. Next I'll be talking about Sera from Fire Emblem Blazing Blade. She's yet another infantry healer with a BST of 148. Sera has pretty decent speed and resistance with pretty low HP and attack and really low defense. FE7 has some good light magic that could be turned into staffs for heroes, but I figured they'd work better for other characters. Instead, I gave her a staff that's been used across many of the games across the series: Silence. Typically in Fire Emblem, Silence can halt enemy magic for a few turns, so to reference this, I made the weapon effective against mage and staff users. I also gave her Dazzling Staff so she can't be counterattacked when she initiates. And lastly, I gave her +3 speed, since if Sera's fully merged with a speed boon and max dragon flowers, she reaches 41 speed, which is pretty solid to prevent her from getting doubled and also lets her double a lot of the units in the game. Silence also gives Sera the Flash ability, which inflicts status on target and foes within 2 spaces of target, preventing counterattacks for the next actions. As for the Refine, if Sera's resistance is higher than the foe's defense at the start of combat, then she'll inflict -7 speed and resistance on the foe. Overall, this weapon makes Sera a speedy healer, with Venetia being able to deal damage to magical opponents, and also lets any ally attack freely, since with Flash, any remaining enemies can't counter-attack back. Until I started making this list, I didn't realise that the majority of Gen 1 infantry healers have 148 BST. And continuing the chain, we've got Sakura from Fire Emblem Fates. I'd compare her stat spread to Lachesis, having no standout stat, but having higher speed and defense, but having lower HP and attack. Also like Lachesis, Sakura actually has her own weapon, Sakura's Rod, but unlike the Air Sword, there was nothing I could really transfer over to Faye by the weapon name and appearance, since all the staff does in Fates is restore 7 health to the target she's healing. However, Sakura does have her own personal skill in Fates called Quiet Strength, which reduces damage to allies within 2 spaces by 2. To reference this, I built it into the weapon's Refine by giving +4 defense/resistance to allies within 2 spaces during combat. I also gave her additional skill in her Refine, unlike the other units on her list, since her weapon isn't as crazy as the others, so I thought I'd compensate for that by giving her essentially Wings of Mercy 4 in her Refine, to reflect her caring nature in trying to heal as many people as possible. For the base weapon, instead of boosting one stat by 3, I decided to boost 2 and give her attack defense +2 instead. Sakura has the super boon in defense, so with that and this increase, it gives her 30 across the board, bar HP, making her a really solid all-around unit. I also gave her Live to Serve 3 and Raffle Staff 3 in her base weapon, so she can keep herself healthy while healing allies, and also having a bit more damage output too, since I think she's bulky enough to the point where she could be a decent enemy phase healer, like Mist. If I had to nerf her weapon a bit, then I'd just get rid of Live to Serve 3 and put Wings of Mercy in her base kit instead of her Refine. But I think even with all these skills, Sakura doesn't really have a good niche in her weapon like the previous 3 characters, so instead she's just a really solid healer that keeps herself and her allies healthy, while also helping them take less damage and ensuring that she can get to damage allies in order to heal them. Now for possibly one of my favourite refines on this list, as well as our first Gen 2 unit and our first cavalry unit I'll be talking about today. Number 6 is Maribel. With her unique weapon I've decided to name Themis's Parasol. Even though cavalry units typically have a lower BST than infantry units, because she came out much later compared to the previous characters on this list, she's actually not too far below them, sitting at 145 BST. She's also really min-maxed, having very low defense, average resistance and HP, and good attack and speed. In fact, she's tied with a few other heroes for the second highest attack for a staff unit. When Maribel was introduced, she came with a really unique weapon, the Trilemma Plus, a weapon that gives the opponent Triangle Adept 3. This allows the units around Maribel to deal even more damage to opponents when they have type advantage. I thought this concept was too unique to scrap, so I gave Maribel a legendary Trilemma weapon, but with a few additions. Since Maribel already has Dazzling Staff in her base kit, I decided to give her Raffle Staff, as well as +3 speed, since even though Maribel has already pretty decent speed, I think she could use a tiny bit of a boost. Maribel's Refine, however, is where her kit gets really interesting. I'm having a hard time trying to put this refine into words, but basically if Maribel is within 2 spaces of a coloured unit like Chrom, and Maribel is battling an enemy who has colour disadvantage against that ally such as Frederick, then Maribel will be treated as the same colour as the ally that has advantage, meaning that against Frederick, Maribel will be treated as a red unit. This makes Maribel an incredibly good offensive healer, because as long as she initiates combat and an ally's nearby, she'll always have triangle advantage against the foe. I also decided to buff the initial trilemma effect as well, so that it works under target during combat and then targets enemies within 2 spaces, like the original effect after combat. This works for a deadly combo, as during the player phase, Maribel will always have type advantage and triangle adept free up if you can position your allies right. This is possibly one of the strongest weapons on this list, so maybe it might be better to nerf it so that it only works with adjacent allies, but I still really like the concept on this one, and I think it really makes her original weapon shine as a preferred weapon. Like I said before, as of the making of this video, there's currently only 4 staff units in the Fae that have a preferred weapon. There's Bridefiorm, Brave Veronica, Brave Camilla, and finally the character that's next on the list, Loki. Loki has slightly more BST than the other infantry healers I've talked about so far, with a total of 151. She has high HP, attack and speed, but low resistance and even lower defense. Loki's preferred weapon is Thökk, a 14 might staff that has built-in raffle staff, and also has the effect of at start of turn if foe's HP is lower than the unit's HP by 3, and foe is in a cardinal direction and uses bow, dagger, magic or staff, foe cannot move more than 1 space for its next action. Considering how Loki's supposed to be a god, I think this is a really weak weapon as it is, and I think it needs a few changes for it to be good. For its refine, I gave it the effect plus 3 HP to start off with. This is a really minor change, but the higher HP Loki has, the better. And with Refines getting a plus 3 HP benefit anyway, this puts her HP at 48 HP naturally, which puts her just under Bartre for the second highest base HP for a non-armoured unit, making it a lot easier for a weapon's effect to activate. I also buff the base weapon to make it so that Loki only needs to have 1 more HP instead of 3, and the effect works on all units instead of just ranged ones. I also considered making the weapon affect foes who are adjacent to anyone in the cardinal direction of Loki, but I'm not sure if that's a bit too much. Let me know in the comments what you think. The last addition I'm giving this weapon is that as well as inflicting gravity on foes, the weapon also resets the special cooldown of the opponents in cardinal directions as well. Meaning that if a foe has a special like Aether or Glaciers ready to proc, but they're in Loki's path, Loki will reset their special, so they have to charge it up all over again. As this trickster goddess, Loki should be a tricky unit to get around. Her weapon can cause units to break their formation in order to try get around her weapon's effect, which may make it easier for Loki and her allies to pick them off. Loki will still have trouble getting this effect to work on most armoured foes with how high her HP can get, but I think with how effective she can be on units with other unit types more than makes up for this. I've been using this next character on my main team for as long as I can remember, even though I should have long replaced her by now since my current kit on her really isn't that good and I just don't feel like investing into the character until she gets a preferred weapon with a refine. This character is the second Blazing Blade character on this list, as well as our second cavalry unit on the list too, and it's none other than Priscilla. Like Maribel, Priscilla also has a BST of 145, just 3 points lower than the Gen 3 infantry healers, and like the majority of them, she doesn't really have an area that she stands out in. She has decent HP, below average attack and speed, low defense, and decent resistance. Healing sets are very bog standard currently, with most people running Dazzling Pain with double Savage Blow. And that goes for the standard Priscilla set too, with most people using merges and attack speed push 3 to boost up her below average attack and speed stats. I didn't want to give Priscilla an upgraded version of Dazzling Pain, but I did want to try work on her attack and speed stats. Like with Sarah, I looked through all the staves and light magic to see what I could come up with, and came across a light magic spell called Luce. Luce is apparently considered the best form of light magic in the game, even stronger than the legendary light magic Aureola. Luce has a very high might, as well as a high crit rate, and I think I managed to transfer both of these aspects into Priscilla's new staff pretty well. In this new weapon I've decided to call Staff of Luce, I gave it a double stat bonus like with Sakura, and gave Priscilla plus 2 attack and speed, in order to start fixing her below average stats. I also gave her Raffle Staff to boost up her damage output even more. Finally for the base weapon, I gave her plus 7 true damage every time she initiates combat. Typically in Fae, crit chance is transferred into the Woe Dao line of weapons, and since staff units don't have any offensive specials, the plus 7 works whenever she initiates. I should probably nerf that since it always works rather than it only working when a special move is active, but hey, I'm just here to tell you what I thought would be cool line of weapons. I never said they'd be balanced. Lastly for the refine, I figured I'd give Priscilla a pretty standard refine, but one that healers never normally have access to, with Swift Sparrow. I think Swift Sparrow 2 would be good enough, but hey, why not add Swift Sparrow 3 for the refine instead, just for the hell of it? This way Priscilla becomes a great player phase unit that can do some real damage when she initiates combat, especially because staff units are colourless, basically turning Priscilla into another colourless mage. Onto the top 3, and to start things off we have Lise from Fire Emblem Awakening. Another infantry healer with a BST of 148, and much like those before her, Lisa's stats aren't anything to speak about, but somehow she ends up pretty well rounded. With 39 HP, 28 defense, and 30 resistance, she can end up pretty bulky, with enough merges and dragon flowers. As for her speed and attack, they're really low too, with 25 and 26 in each stat respectively. Though Lisa has a super boon in both, so she can at least try to fix one of the stats with the right boon. In Awakening, Lisa was often reclassed into a War Cleric, a healer class that used a mix of axes and staves. The most common weapon of choice for Lisa with this class was the Bolt Axe, a 14 might axe that dealt magical damage. To reflect this in Heroes, I decided to name Lisa's new weapon the Bolt Staff. I boosted her damage output by giving her Wrathful Staff 3 and plus 3 in her attack, effectively making this a 17 might staff. I also tried to transfer the magical aspect of the Bolt Axe by making the Bolt Staff act like Felicia's staff, so it calculates damage using the lower of the foe's defense or res. This combined with the plus 3 attack and Wrathful Staff really helps Lisa patch up her poor attack stat, especially if she has a super boon as well. As for Refine of Lisa's staff, I decided to give her Close Counter. All the bolt weapons are able to attack with electricity from a distance, so I figured it'd be a good reference to that with the staff. But since Lisa already is a ranged unit, I just gave her Close Counter instead of the distant counter skill that the bolt weapons would usually provide. With Lisa's new Refine, she proves once and for all that she is not delicate, and becomes a pretty bulky healer that can take damage, deal damage, and heal damage, making her a very well versatile character with the right build. Now that I've finished talking about Lisa, we've reached the top 2, which means there'll be no more 3-star to 4-star characters from here. Our number 2 slot goes to Elise from Fire Emblem Fates. Elise is a 5-star exclusive cavalry healer with 145 BST. She's pretty similar to Maribel in her stat spread, but she isn't as min-maxed, having 32 attack, speed and resistance, while having slightly more defense than Maribel at 19, but less HP than her at 30. Just like Sakura, Elise has her own personal weapon in Fates called Elise's Staff, which restores 10 to 13 HP to an ally in range. She also has her own personal skill called Lily's Poise, which allows allies adjacent to Elise to deal 1 point of extra damage and take 3 less points of damage during combat. Like usual, to start off with, I added a stat boost and either Wrathful or Dazzling Staff to Elise's weapon, opting to go for plus 3 speed so that she reaches 35 base speed with her staff equipped, as well as Dazzling Staff because I noticed so far I've mainly been adding Wrathful Staff to each character's staff so far. I went for a few different ideas for the main effect of her staff, but I finally ended up settling on a power crept version of Camilla's Refine. Since in Fates, Camilla's Rose's Thorns was an inverse of Lily's Poise, and since Camilla's Refine is based on that skill, I thought it would make a good power crept version for Elise. The reason I decided to power creep here is because Camilla's Refine is a lot older, and we've had a ton of way better refines since then. As well as that, Elise is a 5-star exclusive, and they tend to get the better refines if you take a look at Tobin's weapon compared to Grey's. For Elise's base weapon, her effect will basically be a Spectrum Drive. If she's within 2 spaces of an ally, they'll gain plus 4 to all their stats within combat. And with the Refine, Elise will also get plus 3 to all of her own stats if she's within 2 spaces of an ally. I think this weapon is a really good way to implement her personal skill into Heroes, as well as making an old idea a lot more useful. With this weapon, Elise can support her allies with her Spectrum Drive and heal them up after combat, while also having the option to initiate combat herself and get a slightly less powerful version of a buff. Finally, onto my number 1 character for my most wanted Refine, and it's Jenny from Fire Emblem Echoes. Jenny is another infantry healer, but for whatever reason she has 1 less BST than the Gen 1 infantry healers, though she has a lot more min-max to compensate for that. Like Maribel and a couple others, Jenny has one of the highest attack stats for a healer, and also one of the highest res stats too, sitting at 34. The rest of her stats are quite low though, 32 HP, 25 speed, and 21 defense, though she does have a super boon in speed, making it somewhat fixable. For whatever reason, I kept summoning Jenny's, and she's managed to become one of my highest merge 5-star exclusives, sitting at a plus 5 merge. And with the way things have been going, I wouldn't be surprised if she became my second plus 10 5-star as well. In Echoes, the 2 things I think of most with Jenny is Seraphim, Invoke, and Expel. Invoke and Expel would be extremely hard to implement, but Seraphim's already been added in once with Legendary Celica, and I think Jenny is the perfect candidate to also have Seraphim, but this time one that's a bit more true to the game itself. To start with, of course I had a Dazzling Staff since Jenny already has Wrathful Staff in her base kit, and was actually the unit to introduce the skill for those that didn't know. Next I gave her plus 3 attack to complement her weapon's Refine, which I'll talk about in a minute, and because I wanted to boost her strongest stat further to increase her healing and damage output. Finally for the base weapon, I gave her attack Res Rain, and also made her effective against Dragon and Beast units, as the original spell deals effective damage against monsters. It also gives Jenny a cool niche as she already has high damage output, which now goes even further when dealing with one of those units. As for the Refine, I figured I'd make it a conditional effect that works based on her assets. If Jenny has an attack stat that's 3 or higher than the target's, or they're a beast or dragon foe, then Jenny gets to make a guaranteed follow-up attack. She already hits like a truck, so imagine getting hit by that truck twice. Overall, the Staff of Seraphim is meant to work off Jenny's already high attack, making her a dangerous offensive healer, especially to a beast or dragon unit. Her attack can reach insanely high too, with 35 attack naturally. Adding on an attack boon, her weapon, merges, and dragon flowers, Jenny's attack goes all the way up to 62. And if she ends up getting a resplendent ult, she'll reach a grand total of 64, an insane number for a healer. I don't think there's anything else I can say about these staff units, so I think that just about wraps things up for this video. So I hope you enjoyed it, my dudes! If you enjoy Fae content, I also have a bunch of other Re-Finery and crossover theory crafting content coming soon in the future, so I hope you look forward to it. Also, if you enjoyed, I'd really appreciate it if you could give this video a like and subscribe as well. I mainly do a lot of Nintendo and anime content on the channel and over on Twitch, so definitely go check both channels out if that kind of stuff interests you. I'll see you guys in the next time, my dudes. Bye!